Hello, the time has come to cover drug testing, the 20th episode of the second season of The Office. Drug Testing was written by Jennifer Saletta, dang it, I never know how to say that, and directed by Greg Daniels. It first aired on April 27, 2006, and it was viewed by 7.8 million people. The setup for this one is that Dwight finds half a joint in the parking lot and goes to extremes to find the culprit. So for a fun trivia question, how many times does the word urine get used in this episode? Wait for that montage later. With that, let's light this one up, huh? Can I say that?
No one asked you anything ever?
All right, first up for my thoughts.
I like the people I work with generally, with 4 exceptions.
I need to know who you think he's talking about. I'm guessing it's Jim, Ryan, Kelly, and probably Pam based on this comment later in the series.
When I first met Pam, she said something that slightly rubbed me the wrong way. Since then, I've loved working with Pam, and she's frankly wonderful. But I hate her.
One production gaffe that I noticed is that the next episode of Season 2 is the conflict resolution episode, in which this picture...
But I'm sort of an expert at Photoshop, so it turned out fine in the end.
...is taken. So either Michael is a time traveler, or this episode aired out of order. Which, okay, I already know is a fact. This episode actually was the last episode they shot for Season 2. Jenna Fisher noted this on a blog, suggesting that's why her behavior is pretty giddy throughout this episode.
Pam, could you take this down? In addition to Toby's urine being tested...
And we do have a Luann sighting in this episode.
Assistant Regional Manager? You might remember testing...
And I love that you can see Michael eavesdropping next to her. And other interesting notes, after watching the deleted scenes for this episode, it's clear that the police have not been too happy about Dwight's volunteer activity.
I can't wear this anymore.
You were never supposed to wear this in the first place, Dwight. Why don't you give me a couple examples of ways that you've helped us out?
Surveillance, crowd control, directing traffic.
Macy.
And some have probably seen this meme online, but this is the episode in which Steve Carell had injured his finger earlier that week, and they were unable to remove his wedding band. So the crew just wrapped it with a bandage. You'll notice it during some of the talking heads.
I am ridiculously anti-drug. I am so anti-drug that I am above suspicion.
And I am making this thought section pretty brief because we're gonna have to unpack some stuff for the deeper meaning. So with that, let's dive into the deeper meaning.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Okay, so this is a meaty episode to dig into, with a lot of angles to come at it from. Some of this is probably due to how it had to be edited down for primetime television slot. The standard episode of The Office is approximately 22 minutes after 3 or 4 commercial breaks, which they use as transitions for each act of the episode, meaning that they have about 7.5 minutes to complete an arc for each act. Add on top of that the writer's room of The Office would consistently output 45 minutes or more worth of script that had to be shot and edited down to fit that 22-minute time slot. I'm saying this because to really flesh out the drug testing episode, we have to use some of the deleted scenes as well as read between the lines. And so let's get clinical here. First, we have the A-plot. This is Dwight's drug investigation and all the shenanigans that occur throughout. And the B-plot is Jim and Pam's silence game that's played throughout the day. Starting with the main plot, the writers seem to be purposefully invoking the war on drugs in this episode. A little history here. The war on drugs is something that started in the 70s when the Nixon administration started cracking down on recreational drug use. And I suggest that the surface viewing of this episode is social commentary on the war on drugs.
As it turns out, Dwight finding drugs is more dangerous than most people using drugs.
As a disclaimer, I'm not politicizing any of this. I have opinions, but this is an incredibly nuanced discussion, and I'm just here to review episodes of The Office. But back to the issue at hand. So what I'm going to do is take a look at some of the criticisms that people have about the war on drugs and explain how The Office is performing some commentary on those criticisms. So let's start with the misinformation and the ulterior motives. During an interview in 1994, Nixon's domestic policy chief suggested that Nixon engineered the war on drugs to target his political enemies. Since he couldn't prosecute them for being against him politically, he had to figure out something to prosecute them for. As such, the ball started rolling with this war on drugs. Half-truths were passed off as hard evidence, and The Office seems to be taking a jab at some of this in this episode. Michael seems to be a stand-in for the US government, who used to not care anything about drugs other than maybe getting some tax dollars from it.
Because I was half-baked, smoking doobies.
Now, his hardline stance against drugs seems to have nothing to do with the drug usage itself.
I am ridiculously anti-drug. I am so anti-drug that I am above suspicion in any way that involves suspicion or testing of any kind.
That I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
And another jab against the Nixon administration, I believe, is the ignorance shown in Michael's presentation, which this is a great example of.
How many of these are you familiar with?
Hookah is not an illegal drug, Michael.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
But also the fact that he misspelled heroin. But this is just the start. With the war on drugs came a lot of legislation. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, Congress passed laws with the hope of solving a drug problem in America. The goals on the surface was to help detract people from engaging in drugs. Instead, it actually created a whole new class of criminals.
Criminals, Tony. I think that's the word you're looking for. It didn't used to mean me.
I'd say the office is paralleling this with Dunder Mifflin's policy on drug testing.
It's automatic drug testing conducted within 24 hours.
Is that true, Toby?
Oh, when you sign your job application, you agree to comply with random drug testing.
And it is clear from that clip, while Toby toes the line, it's clear he's not comfortable with this policy and really has no interest in actually pursuing it.
Michael's behavior is erratic and unpredictable, but I don't think he's doing drugs. Maybe he should take the edge off.
And that's probably because he knows that the consequences of being found guilty here have a devastating impact to the individual.
Is it bad? Am I getting fired?
And it creates situations like Michael experiences here.
And I think I may have gotten high accidentally by a girl.
Which would have been a false positive that would have ended Michael's career with Dunder Mifflin. So I definitely think there's some parallels there. But when it comes to law enforcement, another serious criticism of the war on drugs goes back to the original complaint of targeting specific demographics, namely the anti-war left and minorities. Throughout this episode, the office seems to be making several digs at law enforcement. Dwight, the bumbling yet intense fool, seems to represent law enforcement. For example, here,
This is what all good law enforcement officers dream of. The chance to solve an actual crime.
Dwight's intensity doesn't seem to be truly based in his education.
That is Northern Lights cannabis indica.
No. It's marijuana.
Dwight's interrogation manner is incredibly offensive.
Shows a lack of motivation.
Hey.
Michael, representing the administration, seems to have no problem calling out the minorities and the left.
Your instinct is to say it's somebody like Stanley or Oscar.
Excuse me?
No, your instinct, that your gut reaction is to say that, but I don't.
Dwight, again representing the law enforcement, has no problem with racial profiling.
What does that mean to a United States law enforcement officer? He's a potential drug mule.
And overall, Michael Schur doesn't seem to have an issue calling out the Nixon administration.
Let's do the Nixon tapes. That's my jam!
What you always have to remember with the Irish is they get mean. Virtually every Irish I've known gets mean when he drinks.
And then lastly, this episode also criticizes the propaganda used in the war on drugs. This was both in the form of misleading statistics.
Now I want everybody to take a look to their right. One of those people will be dead from drug use.
As well as in the use of media. Growing up in the 90s, I watched a lot of PSAs, either in television shows or in commercials.
Do you think that smoking drugs is cool? Do you think that doing alcohol is cool?
Here's Michael's version of a PSA.
Drugs. Let's not and say we did.
But I do wish we would have gotten a Diversity Tomorrow type video for this episode. That would have been great. The topic of narcotics is incredibly nuanced, and I don't think that The Office is either anti-police or pro-drug. I think instead it's a comedy taking jabs at policies in an attempt to bring light to social issues, which is something that comedies should do, in my opinion. But you might ask, what the heck does this have to do with the B plot of this episode? Well, other than Jim and Pam's plot revolves around coke.
Here.
The better correlation is that Dwight is on a quest to find who is hiding the truth because he knows that someone is just acting like a normal law-abiding citizen on the surface. But the reality is that Jim is the one who's playing a role. Jim's acting ability is invoked twice in this episode.
Tangy zip of Miracle Whip.
Jim does the best impressions. Sometimes he'll look up at me from his desk and he'll just be someone else. Wow! He really pulled out the big guns.
See, he has truth hiding under the surface like a geyser just ready to blow.
That's what she said.
And that's what I think this episode is doing. Advancing the plot of Jim and Pam in the background while creating an over-the-top premise to do so. One in which I think the writers had a ton of fun doing. Jim's final words in this episode have to be the motivating revelation for his actions in the casino episode that's coming up.
Why does he do the things that he does for Michael? I just don't get it. What is he getting out of that relationship?
Or I don't know, maybe this whole episode exists just to introduce us to my 5th favorite supporting character of all time.
Dwight K. Schrute, I hereby declare you an honorary volunteer corporal in charge of assisting all activities security.
I love Hank. But with that, let's dish out some Dundies.
Then I gotta get him to the Dundies.
All right, so that went deep. Let's get away from the drug stuff.
The Doobie Doobie Pothead Stoner of the Year Award
goes to Michael Scott.
I went to an Alicia Keys concert over the weekend.
And I'm also going to point out that I love the image of Michael Scott going to an Alicia Keys concert, presumably solo and in a suit and tie. It's just an image to behold, one that I think we were robbed of. But we have one more Dundie to go. The best bloopers of any episode of Season 2 goes to drug testing. Enjoy this.
I will pray to Thor himself. Marijuana leads to crack, which leads to crystal meth, which leads to death, which leads to... I am praying to find this heinous culprit. And I will pray to Thor himself. I'm sorry, I'm...
You now exactly how much pot did you smoke?
10 a.m. and then work the beet fields till well after midnight.
I used to get a runner's high, which is why now I lift. Jen!
I'm sorry.
Jen!
That's awesome.
All right, so you stuck around this long. Let's give you the answer to that trivia question.
Urine. And it has to be urine.
Toby's urine.
Remember testing my urine?
Test a lot of urine.
I need your urine, just the urine. I need your urine. I need clean urine. Urine goes all over the place.
Not my urine.
Under the urine.
Do you want to give Michael your urine?
I want him to have all the urine he needs.
We just need urine, sir.
Dwight was literally carrying around his own urine and dressed like one of the village people.
16 times the word urine is used in this episode. That has to be a world record or something. But let's get to the ratings.
Then I gotta get him to the Dundies.
It's episodes like this that I have a hard time rating, but that's what I'm here to do. Put in the hard work and get the job done. This cold opening is just an extended sequence from the episode, and there's just not really much to love here. I'm gonna give this a 2 out of 5. It doesn't hit much of my criteria on what makes a good cold opening. As for the episode though, I give this one a 4 out of 5. There's a lot to this one. Everything works together really well to create an exceptional episode. But that's just what I think about the drug testing episode. What are your thoughts on this one? What are your thoughts on my take on the deeper meaning? Leave it in the comments. I really want to hear what you have to say about this episode. As always, I'm glad you stuck around this long to close out this field guide. If you stuck around this long, hit the like button for me. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and all that. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Knock it off, okay? I'm interviewing you. No, you said that I'd be conducting the interview when I walked in here. Now exactly how much pot did you smoke? Now exactly how much pot did you smoke?